Well, good evening, Comp 1, Section 74. I've been playing the guitar a long time. I've been playing blues a long time, too, and only recently have I gotten one of these little glass slides to try to play old-timey sounding blues. I'm not very good at it. I'll keep working at it. It's harder than it looks. The blues are on my mind a little bit this evening because it's pretty difficult for me to think about the great Martin Luther King without thinking about the blues and all the extraordinary contributions Martin Luther King and people like him have made to this great country of ours. I had the hope that I would get just a brief and humble little video up honoring Martin Luther King by Martin Luther King Day, which was last week. But the good news is, as you all probably know, February is just around the corner, and that is quite famously Black History Month in America. And I'm excited tonight to try to communicate just a few things that I think about when I think about Martin Luther King. I joked in the news item on D2L that you probably don't have a lot of confidence that I'd be able to teach you much about Martin Luther King and his place in history and the very rich story of what is essentially a black rhetorical theory or a black rhetorical history. I joked on the D2L item that I'm so white, I actually know the song words to Sonny and Cher songs, and I was just goofing around. In a little video like this, 10, 11, 12 minutes, whatever it comes out to be, there's no way I'm going to be able to communicate to you everything that I think and feel when I consider Martin Luther King. But I think I can cover a few basic things. I should have say my source here too. An awful lot of what I know about orators like Martin Luther King comes from a man named Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., who the last time I looked is still the director of Harvard's Center for Black American Studies. He's a brilliant man, and luckily I've got a lot of books here, and a couple of them in my several libraries scattered throughout the compound here are books by Henry Louis Gates Jr. One of them has kind of a strange title. It's called The Signifying Monkey. And when you're someone who comes from my background and you want to understand black rhetoric in this country, well, you go to him because he's pretty much the end of the line. But let's just say a couple simple things to honor this man, Martin Luther King. The first thing I want to do is place Martin Luther King in a tradition, so to speak, a succession of great rhetoricians, great orators, who lost their lives because they more or less talked themselves to death. We have a long history of people who were brave enough in dangerous situations to stand up and speak the truth. I go back to Socrates, for instance, and I try to connect Socrates and Martin Luther King. Think about that story. Socrates is a saint to me. I mean, he is just so important in the history of rhetoric. Athens put him to death for several things, among others, corrupting the youth of Athens famously, and being monotheistic. These are charges with which I'm very familiar. And they had him drink hemlock. 3 or 4 centuries after that, we have what for some of us is the end of the line of all martyrs, Christ. Around about that time, actually a little bit before it, we had a Roman named Cicero who actually had the nerve to stand on the floor of the Roman Senate and speak against the assassins of Julius Caesar. They cut his head clean off, the Romans did. And you move through history, and we get, skip quite a few centuries, we get to Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More in England refused to back down. And, as the line in Shakespeare goes, off with his head too. And he died. But if we think about King for a second, he came on the American scene during a very tempestuous period of time in American history. We could think of just the breadth of a few years. Think what happened. We lose John F. Kennedy, a great writer, assassinated. And then on April 4th, down in the South, Martin Luther King takes that bullet because he just could not stop talking about the need for us to treat everyone in this country as brothers and sisters. And I was just observing this morning up at Central Lakes College in my classical mythology class. I showed them a video of Bobby Kennedy speaking the very night that Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy, who stood in front of the American people with one question in his head: what in the world am I going to say to palliate this pain, this suffering that we're all going through? I was a little kid. I watched this on TV. I was 7 or 8 years old. And Bobby Kennedy, only a few months away from his own assassination, for standing up for what was right and speaking out. Bobby Kennedy, right then and there, recited Aeschylus, the famous Greek tragedian. So right there, in kind of a big way, I want to place King among a series of great people who spoke the truth no matter what, who were assassinated. And the other thing they have in common is that all of these people, as I think of it, they could have gotten out of it. They could have fallen silent, for instance, but they just couldn't. They just couldn't. They stood up for what they believed. So just still going big picture, and just to tell you a little bit about the history of black rhetoric in this country, let's sort of just say it. We come to this country several hundred years ago. You know how it goes. Columbus goes to the north, accidentally. Hernan Cortez goes to the south. Most of the countries in the Central and South America end up speaking Spanish. Weirdly, even though Columbus is Portuguese, we end up speaking English, and we come to this place. And the first thing we find is the Garden of Eden. Well, if you're in the Garden of Eden, you've got to commit some kind of sin. And I've always been telling my students for years that I consider that sin to be slavery. All right? I love Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and all those guys. Well, let's face facts. When they signed the Declaration of Independence, they had slaves standing there with them right on the stage. For 300 years in this country, as Kurt Vonnegut would put it, we decided that certain people could be owned like machines. And an entire economy was built up and developed on the backs of our brothers and sisters, the black folk that lived in the 1600s, 1700s, and in the 1800s. Now this is what Gates teaches me to teach you about the history of black rhetoric. The rule one is this: if you want to hold slaves, if you want to be a slaveholder, and I'm sure none of you do, trick one is you don't allow them to be able to read and write. We did not allow, for all those decades, those 3+ centuries, we did not allow blacks in the South to be educated or to go to school. And I'll tell you why. People like me and you that can pick up books and read them and then write were officially dangerous. As Jean-Paul Sartre, the famous French existentialist, once wrote, "Nobody writes for slaves." Nobody. So rule one, if you're going to impress an entire people that you've stolen from a continent, that you're forcing to work as servants in your houses and in your fields, you do not want them to be literate. Literate people we're dangerous. We're officially dangerous. Gates also points out that even though we did not allow blacks in this country for all those years to have schools, we could not stop them from talking to one another, from speaking to one another, from singing to one another. The language, it simply developed, coming over up through the Caribbean, through the French Creole, through the South. An extraordinary kind of speech evolved. Henry Louis Gates points out that even though we did not allow black people to go to school in this country, we did allow, they did have 3 places where language most certainly developed. The first of these places, according to Gates, is the home. A particular kind of black vernacular English developed in the home, and he points out that it is the black matriarch, the mother, in all those tens of thousands of homes in the South that decided who spoke and how. It was the mother in those homes that was in charge of that. Now, if you ever pick up his books, you'll find out that Gates goes into these incredibly complicated classifications of black tropes, right? How black people speak. And he's got an awful lot to say about that as a black American man, one of our great geniuses. The second place where Gates pointed out as important for the development of black English in this country is in the world of the street, okay? Think all of those cities that after the Reconstruction blacks excitedly fled to. They come north to Chicago and Philadelphia and New York and Minneapolis and St. Paul and Brainerd. And underneath those streetlights in the evening, that language continued to develop. And that's why we have all these miraculous words that we use every day. Words like guy, man, hip, cool, on and on and on and on. Those words in that language were developed under the glare of those streetlights, under the stars of those old cities in the late 1900s and the earlier part of the 20th century. But here's the part that where King comes in and where we can understand him a little bit further. Blacks are denied schools, but we allowed them homes. They had some freedom once they got to the streets of this great country. And all of those decades, we allowed them to have churches. Not very nice ones, but they had churches, which meant that a very distinctive kind of black rhetoric developed from behind the pulpit. No, I'm not an expert on this. I've just read about it and I've been thinking about it all my life. But if you look back just at the latter part of the 1800s, latter 20th century, late 1800s, early 1900s, is the straightforward flourishing and development of great black orators who got their start rhetorically from behind the pulpits in churches. And if you look back at W.B. Du Bois, look at the Reverend Jesse Jackson, right? The Reverend Jesse Jackson. He's a preacher first, a political figure second. And we think of Dr. Martin Luther King, who is also Reverend Martin Luther King. If you go back on YouTube or wherever you want to go on the internet and look at some of these utterly sensational speeches that King delivered to help civil rights advance in this country in the 1960s, you're going to see a really smart guy, but you are also going to hear a distinctive black rhetoric, a distinctive black oratory, and you are going to hear the tropes, the tricks, so to speak, of a preacher. I could tell you too that Gates teaches me that one of the really interesting things about black rhetoric is that when black men or women are speaking in public, they fully expect the audience to, in kind of a reciprocal way, give them feedback. All right. And being a white guy here in the North, I can assure you that when I went to Mass this last Sunday, you know, it was church, right? We stood up for a while, then we sat, then we sang, then we prayed, and at no time at Mass this last Sunday did I feel like yelling, "Oh, tell it, Father Jerome! Lord have mercy, Father Jerome!" I would have been, you know, cuffed or at least looked at as weird. But if you're a black orator in the South speaking to black people, you are expecting to get some kind of feedback loop. And I just think that's so interesting. And if any of you have ever had the luck to go to a service in the South, you know what I'm talking about. So I just wanted to talk about this a little bit tonight. I wanted to honor Martin Luther King and place him sort of in a history that I'm just kind of glossing over. But a couple final things about black vernacular speech. Gates teaches me to teach this to you. Rule 1, try to respect all of the dialects that you hear, wherever they're from. New York, the South, California, the Central Midlands. Linguistically, we're supposed to think about the way people speak as something to be celebrated and enjoyed. If you ever heard a recording of William Faulkner speaking, you'd go, wow, he's a hick. Well, he's also exactly the kind of hick that they give the Nobel Prize in Literature to. He's from the South. How we speak and how we write are not necessarily the same thing. Black speech is grammatical. Black vernacular speech is also rule-governed. And according to Gates, black vernacular speech might be the language of the future. Think of the phrase, "I be walkin'," for instance. When is that? That could be yesterday, that could be today, tonight, it could be 3 years from now. There's no tense. Just something to put before you. I'll close this little video by giving you a screenshot of a website that I heard about at my other job down here at the College of St. Benedict when Martin Luther King Day came around. It is the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change, and all you've got to do is go to kingcenter.org, and for the journals this week, just click on Archives, and you're going to find all kinds of stuff to read about regarding Martin Luther King, this great man that I'm just really proud to be able to talk about just a little bit. And a little supplemental video for 2012 here. See you in the next video.